a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, this very early morning or this evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our special event, our special webinar panel discussion on the topic of critically discussing the need for qualitative methods in supply chain management. So this event is part of a series of events that we will be hosting in connection with our special issue toward novel ways of doing qualitative methods in supply chain management research, which is taking a developmental approach to be able to support the development of new skills, capabilities, and approaches to really diversify the in our methodological toolkit in the supply chain management field. I'm here together with my fellow guest editors, Eugenia Roska, who's kindly controlling the screen for us, and also Alina Stegma, who is monitoring the chat. And so, as I say, we warmly welcome you to our event this morning. So this will constitute our first in-depth discussion, as I mentioned, as part of our series, and we'll be focusing on this critical discussion about this need for qualitative methods. We're joined by three amazing speakers who are going to give us a rich and varied set of presentations and then discussion of their experiences and perspectives on this need for qualitative methods. Before I introduce them formally, I just wanted to flag a few of our upcoming events that will, as I said, constitute this series of events and webinars that we'll be hosting as part of the developmental initiative. So just two to make you aware of and to keep in mind. Firstly, in March, we'll be in Porto as joining the Sustainability Forum, where we'll be running a co-creation session with more rich and in-depth and interactive in-the-room discussions of novel ways of doing qualitative research, to take stock of some current practices, brainstorm some innovations, and there's also an opportunity then as part of that for you to share your developing proposals as part of the special issue and to be a part of that discussion and develop those proposals through that co-creation session as well. So some key dates for you. The event, the co-creation session itself will be on Monday, March 16th at 11 o'clock in Porto. So if you're there, if you're joining the forum, we are very excited to hopefully see you there. But in order to participate, we'd ask you that you should please share your proposal via email to the guest editors, that's Eugenia, Alina, and myself, by March the 10th. So that will be great. And the other thing to highlight is that then when we are away from the conference circuit, we will be, at least for now, we will be in April hosting our first expert-led discussion of a specific method. And the intention with these discussions is to invite experts who are really familiar with particular qualitative methods that might be more novel and unusual for ourselves in the supply chain management discipline, but for them as part of their research in adjacent fields, in wider organization studies or in media studies or in law, in various adjacent disciplines, these methods are quite common and routine. And so that'll give us an opportunity for us to hear their experiences, their guidance, their best practices. And so please keep an eye out for more information on that event, which will be taking place, as I say, in April 2026. And then, of course, there'll be more after that as well. So we will be running a series of events, as I say, right up to the proposal submission for this initiative. So please keep an eye out for that. But most importantly is what we're here to do today. And so I'm very excited to introduce our agenda for today and, more importantly, our guest speakers. So, first of all, we're going to hear a presentation from Andreas Wieland, who, in his capacity as co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Supply Chain Management, who's very supportive of our developmental initiative here for our special issue, is going to be speaking a little bit about expanding this discussion of the philosophical nuances that really underpin the possibilities for diversity in qualitative approaches and why that's so important for the supply chain management field, and how to really deepen our thinking about those nuances for high quality qualitative approaches. And then we're going to hear from Professor Vikram Bhakoo, who's joining us from Melbourne this evening. And he's a professor of supply chain management, and he's going to be speaking to us about and reflecting on his experiences as a qualitative researcher, particularly his affinity for the interpretive end of qualitative research, although, of course, drawing on his experiences at the more perhaps projects that are more in the positivist end of qualitative research as well. But with his affinity for interpretive research, thinking about how perhaps not all the qualitative approaches that we might be most familiar with in supply chain management are perhaps best suited to understanding, capturing the lived, interpreted realities of those local contexts and those local communities, perhaps that we seek to understand across the supply chain management scope and field. And then last but not least, we'll be hearing from Leonardo Marques, who's joining us in Brazil at the moment from Audencia Business School. He's an Associate Professor of Supply Chain Management at Audencia Business School, and he'll be reflecting as well on his experiences of his fieldwork, and particularly of taking that leap into qualitative approaches, particularly from having been trained and grown up within a more traditional perspective on supply chain management, but taking that leap then into qualitative approaches and thinking specifically and talking to us about his rich fieldwork experiences, particularly around intervention work as well. So that's just a flavour of some of the themes and discussions that will be coming up in the presentations. And after that, we will have an open panel discussion to put some specific questions to our panel, and also open that to the floor for a Q&A and any of your questions that you might have for our speakers. So on that basis, please feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat box as we go through. Alina will be monitoring that, and then we will be able to have a look through and address as many as we possibly can in the time we have left. But on that basis, I'm going to stop talking and allow us to commence with our more interesting presentations. And we'll start with Andreas. So I'm very pleased to introduce Andreas Wieland. Thank you very much, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victoria. And also really thank you, Alina, Eugenia, and Victoria for driving this. This is such a fantastic opportunity for qualitative researchers, and of course also for JSCM. So I'm Andreas Wieland, one of the 3 co-editors-in-chief alongside Davide Luzzini, who's also here today. I've seen him, and Hannah Stoles. Yeah, so qualitative research, I should maybe go a bit back. My own background is information systems. So I wanted to study computer science. So I thought the world is logic. I still think partly it is. But I also thought when I moved to Copenhagen 12 years ago that positivist positions, that we need to strive for reliability, validity, is the only way of doing things. And I learned so many new things when I started at Copenhagen Business School. I'm sure many of you have been in AOM, and it's an exciting research environment, but also I was challenged by so many new ideas. And this drove me a bit also to bring this into what JSCM is doing. We have done this, not just me, also our predecessors have done this, to really try to establish JSCM as a journal that is really open for different perspectives. And we have associate editors and reviewers where we believe they really understand different positions. Just this week, to give an example, we promoted 5 new reviewers, and 4 of them are constructivists / interpretivists. It's always a difficult word. Just to ensure that you're not forced to change your mind just because reviewers want you to change the mind. So if you maybe can go to the next slide. Onto epistemological assumptions. This is really, I think, the key of what you should think about, although it's on a very high philosophical level in a way, but actually it's also part of your identity. And this is maybe what the quote says. Let me just read this from Marsh et al. Ontological and epistemological positions should not be treated like a sweater that can be put on when we are addressing such philosophical issues and taken off when we are doing research. Researchers cannot adopt one position at one time for one project and another one on another occasion for a different project. So what this quote says is they are criticizing researchers who are positivist in one paper, then interpretivist in another, and then, I don't know, something else in a third paper. I'm not sure if I would fully agree. So I think it is possible maybe to move back and forth, also in different research collaborations. But some people would strictly argue that you shouldn't. Whatever your position is on this question, I think it is really important that you are reflexive on your position, that you really think about your ontological and epistemological assumptions. And in JSCM, at least in qualitative research, and in quant, it's mostly maybe less relevant to really show this clearly because it's obvious. But in qualitative research, I think at least spend a few words, 2 or 3 sentences or so, saying what is it that you are believing in? Do you believe in subjectivity in the world or in an objective truth in one reality? Because it's really relevant for instance, narrative research. What are these different narratives that you are trying to capture? They can contradict each other, and you can try to really focus on one of these. If you go to the next slide. Sorry. So this also then shapes the way what high quality research is, because depending on what you believe in, if you're a subjectivist, for instance, and these are just this is just one view. There's different authors who presented different quality criteria, but the thickness of description of your qualitative research, authenticity, plausibility, criticality, that could then be really important in your method section to write about, and also to reflect on before you do that, rather than forcing yourself into, although you don't believe into an objective world of quality criteria like validity and reliability. I really mention this because we are receiving a lot of studies where it's clear that the authors are not objectivists, but they are still pushing into this direction in the method section. Or sometimes when we have reviewers, and this still happens, although we're very careful, that the reviewer then suggests to push more into generalizability, for instance, when obviously subjective truth can't be generalized. I mean, it's you own it, right? So that means respect alternative criteria for quality of research, even if you don't believe into this. Let's say you're a reviewer for a journal, not just JSCM, and you have a certain stance, but maybe you're selected because of a certain theory that was used, and then be open. So don't try to force people to change their belief. It's almost like forcing someone to change their religion. It is really deep into us. This is what the quote said on the last slide about the skin rather than the sweater. So especially hypotheses or propositions in qualitative research might not make sense always, especially not if you are subjectivist. And I think this initiative is also really pushing to the left side of this slide here. And I must say also JSCM is also really open for this perspective. That doesn't mean that we are rejecting objectivist papers in the future, but we want more diversity. And our field used to be quite restricted maybe on post-positivist positions for many years, where other disciplines have already widened their scope. And JSCM now, I think we are also known for that now, has really shifted. If you go to the next slide. So we recently published an editorial in JSCM. I don't know if you're sharing the slides, but this is, you can find at the bottom right side, you can find the DUI link also. So this is just 5 approaches out of 10 that we were talking about in this paper. It's of course not or in this editorial, it's of course not a full list of everything that is possible, but grounded theory, for instance, can be positivist, can be interpretivist, sense making, social materiality, actor network theory. The last one are more, that's why I called it approaches, or we called it approaches and not methods. Often they are really aligned with certain views on or the types of qualitative research, although the last 2 are maybe theories rather than methods. If we go to the next slide. Then very or increasingly common, we are also getting submissions in that direction, is ethnographic research. So this is, of course, an approach that is not coming or was not invented in management research, but you can see that a lot in management research and also related disciplines, org studies, but also supply chain management now, where you are living with people in the company for a while. My own PhD student spent a few months now in an organization to really interact with them, being part of this. A bit similar action research, so maybe the outcome is not necessarily the same, but also a very interactive approach where you're really engaged. Discourse analysis, narrative research, historical research, approaches that are really shaping the way we think and how things have been discussed and phenomena have been discussed in a certain area. Increasingly common, Victoria also mentioned discourse analysis as a opportunity soon. Historical research is, we rarely get manuscripts in that direction, but I think it could be super interesting to receive more. If you go to the next slide. Maybe you can show the full thing. This is an animation. Yeah, this is inspired by Miriam Wilhelm. I don't know if she's here. She once gave a presentation. I found this very interesting. I extended on it. Qualitative research doesn't necessarily mean interviews. Yeah, it can be different types of data, also a combination of it. Archival data, and here are examples that I put here. Artifacts and drawings. I will show you a bit later some drawings. So not just words can be qualitative, but also pictures or observations, how people behave, how they dress, what they use in their work life. And of course, videos. So videos contain so many data, and you can also find creative ways of analyzing them. And yeah, I put some sources here, hopefully to inspire you in that direction. And yeah, I mentioned drawings. If you go to the next picture, exactly. This is an article that Nathalie Fabkost and her co-authors conducted, where they asked people in a French company, in a car company, actually, Renault is even mentioned there, to draw a supply chain. A positivist would now try to generalize, so squeeze these 4 drawings, and they had many more. I think you can also download them as an online attachment, squeeze them into one perfect model. So assuming everyone overlooked things, but if you generalize that, then you can see the whole picture. But a subjectivist would see the individual pictures and would see they're all at different in different positions. They all have different views on the world. And I think this illustrates, this is why I selected this also, this illustrates very nicely why we need both the type of research that generalizes, but also the one that acknowledges that social worlds are socially constructed and people are having these individual positions. So yeah, I think you can go to the next slide, which is just a reading list where I put some articles. If we are sharing the slides, then you can maybe take a look. Some different positions. The last one is also this editorial that we wrote. So that was a bit what I wanted to discuss for now.
Thank you so much, Andreas. That's really inspiring for setting the scene, for saying qualitative doesn't just have to mean words, or doesn't just have to mean interviews, and positivism and reliability and validity are not the only way of doing things. And I think these are really important messages. It can be scary, I guess, to move into that more diverse space, but it's really reassuring to hear that from you in terms of JSCM's perspective. So thank you very much for that. That's a great start for us, which moves us on then to Professor Vikram Bhakoo, who's joining us now to speak about his perspective. Thank you very much, Vikram.
Great. Thank you so much, Victoria. And I want to thank all the special issue editors for, getting me to speak about this topic, which is really close to my heart, actually. So a little bit of background about me. I am predominantly a qualitative researcher. Makes me a bit of an outlier in the field. My PhD was completely qualitative, which I finished, God, I feel old now, over 15 years back. And I remember when I was writing up my thesis and my supervisor asked me, so when are you actually doing the survey? And I said, there will be no survey in this study. So that's where I came from. But just a disclaimer that I have the views that I'm presenting here are my own personal views in terms of, where the field is headed and a few ideas around that. And also I started doing a lot of positivist qualitative research, but more recently, I have kind of moved towards employing the interpretist paradigm, and particularly methods that I am using are discourse analysis and more immersive methods like ethnography. I think we'll go to the next, Eugenia. Thank you. So why is there a seismic shift in supply chain thinking? And I think my belief is one of the big things that is happening. I mean, we all read the headlines in the morning with the geopolitical tensions and issues around the climate emergency and all these issues. But there are 2 points that are interrelated here. One of them is that there are these crises happening simultaneously and the interdependence between these crises. And one of the projects that I worked with more recently, which was in this Thai seafood industry that I'll speak about a little bit later, I noticed that, for instance, the climate crisis is leading to a decline in the fish, and particularly there are certain species that are getting endangered. Now, because of that, the fishermen have to spend longer time on the sea. They also are using certain other vessels like trawlers to catch more fish. So you need people on those boats that are completely vulnerable and dependent on you. And that's kind of perpetuating modern slavery in this thing. So both these crises are one example of how they're interdependent with each other. And also we need to understand what is happening in the global south, particularly around the mining sector or the cocoa grower farmers and so forth. So these are some of the things where I feel we require different questions and a new set of tools to investigate them. The other thing is that the supply chains now have newer entities within the frame. So typically we used to have a buyer, supplier, third-party logistics provider. But now we are actually dealing with the ILO. We are dealing with different consumers. We are dealing with certification bodies. We are dealing with faith-based organizations. We are dealing with the military. We are dealing with NGOs. How do we deal with these different set of organizations, which were typically not within our frame? And we were, as supply chain scholars, not used to interact with these people. So this makes it also very important to understand their dynamics and how they function. Finally, we've got these new technologies out there that are kind of pacing the way we do work and how organizations function, and they, warrant different ways of how do we actually understand them. So this is my main pitch for you all that are seeing this, is that we need more interpretist research. And just to clarify, what I mean by interpretist research is to understand the lived experience of the participants, really working closely with the participants, understanding their social structures, their cultures, their routines, their habits, but with a vested interest on how it impacts supply chain management practices. And that would vary. Just to give you an example of how cocoa farmers might implement a certain technology, certain practices might vary in Ghana compared to what's happening in tin mining in Indonesia, just to give you an example there. The next slide, please. Okay, so this is just to give you an example of one of my recent studies that was published along with my co-authors. The paper's out there in production and operations management. But this is to give you an example how we looked at how NGOs are coming into the frame of supply chain. So the motivation of the study, in a sense, was that your traditional compliance-based approaches, which are top-down, multinational telling the supplier to adopt a certain practices, that is actually failing to mitigate forced labor. So how do we engage with NGOs, as people referring to them as social intermediaries, and how do we kind of design effective interventions? So if you go to the next thing, Virginia. So basically, the question was, what are the sources of power? How do we actually get NGOs which technically do not have power in the supply chain to actually make constructive changes? And how do we design effective interventions? So that you can read the paper, it's all published. But I want to now go into what's not published. I think that's a more interesting aspect of it. So this is, I think Andres mentioned the whole concept of being reflexive. And in this special issue, I think if you're looking at novel qualitative means, it involves reflexivity. Now, we use this word, and what does it really mean? So I thought I'd give you a practical example from this study as to what reflexivity actually means. So this project involved around 4 field trips to Thailand because we were trying to understand the issue of modern slavery in the Thai seafood industry, which Thailand was slapped with the yellow card for illegal, undisclosed, and unidentified fishing. So one of the things is that when I first went into a seafood processing center, and the picture that you're seeing is one of the pictures that I had taken when I actually went to a seafood processing center. Now, I had no experience in seafood processing. My training was not in that area, so it was a big learning experience for me. And the things that caught me by surprise when I went there was that the large number of migrant workers working in the seafood processing sector. They were 2/3 of the workers were women, and women from Myanmar and Cambodia. And as you can see, it is in Thailand. It's a lot of manual labor involved. And what you can't see in the picture is the smell. It is really a lot of smell of the fish actually being cut and being then processed to, those of you who eat tuna out of a can, a lot of this is actually Thailand is one of the biggest exporters of canned tuna in the world. So this is one of my thing. And the other thing is the research question evolved as we went through that process. And these are my own reflections on it. The first entry into the field, we were just beginning to understand how does traceability look like in a supply chain. But as we went into the field and starting to understand the issues around modern slavery, a question involved in terms of how are NGOs playing an important role in this aspect, and how do they empower the workers? And the other thing was that I became aware of my own biases and my own assumptions. And I think this is something that those of you doing, interpretive work and going to be submitting to the special issue need to have some kind of things. What did the biases, did you go in with the field, and how did you kind of deal with them, overcome them? So I'll give you an example of what happened with me. I had developed an interview protocol. All of you, I think, go into the field and you have a set defined interview protocol. But when I started interviewing the Thai nationals and started speaking to them, and I had the term modern slavery in my interview protocol, they felt very uncomfortable with it. And they clamped out. A lot of them felt nervous. It was like shame. And it was then, okay, I need to change this question and I need to frame it very differently. And we've been trained in a Western context to be very direct and explain. And I think that I also needed to see how I modified the interview protocol based on who I was interviewing. Versus if I was speaking to the ILO, it was very different. Versus if I was speaking to the government officials, it was different. To the NGOs, it was different. So these are some of the things that I think need to be discussed in a paper like this in terms of how do you actually customize the interview protocol for different stakeholders. Finally, I think we realized in a couple of our field trips that the worker perspective was really, really important. And to get a true worker perspective or an insider view, we needed to speak to them through a local NGO, person who spoke their local language, so that they could give a candid, open account without being fearful. Because a lot of the workers are very fearful. What will happen? Will we lose our jobs? Will we be deported back into our country? And this is something that came through subsequently as the fieldwork progressed. So, like I said, these are my own reflexive account of the study. Then we move on to the next thing. And so this is, if I had to do I'm now talking about, if one had to do an extension to the study, and there's some work that's ongoing. But one of the troubling issues with this issue of modern slavery is remediation. Now, if you have found workers either on the vessels or in the seafood sector that have not been paid adequately, they have been physically or verbally abused, their documents have been confiscated, what is the right form of remuneration? Is there just simple apology? Is it a monetary payment? But for some people, it's also reskilling themselves to get into another sector. And for that, you really need a deeper immersion in the field. You really need to understand what do the participants really want, and how are their requirements going to be fulfilled with them. And for that, it's not one semi-structured interview that can help, work through that. And here I want to reiterate Andres's point that one needs different data sources. And our qualitative research, and I'm guilty of it as well. When I'm talking about it, I'm guilty of doing semi-structured interviews. I mean, they work well. But I think what we need is, I said the first thing we need to do is adapting interviews. And I have done that a lot now, where you adapt interviews for different stakeholders. So for some stakeholders, you might even speak to them for 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and then warm up and speak to them again. In one of my studies that I've done in the construction sector, we've got an experienced consultant on board who came with us for all the interviews. And the reason was the consultant had trust with the existing organization so that the candid conversations could take place. So you need to adapt, and this needs to be mentioned in terms of how these interviews were conducted, what space were they conducted in, particularly when you're trying to speak to workers or vulnerable groups. This needs to be discussed. The other thing which has not been used too much in our discipline are long interviews. So these are interviews with last 2 or 3 hours. Now we'll say, you can't possibly, interview for 2 or 3 hours, but sometimes you just put, so for instance, if you really want to understand views of the indigenous communities towards certain things, you might put an artifact and say, how does this resonate with you? And talk to them, taking breaks and speaking to them about different issues and so forth before you actually start talking about a specific designated problem. Using archival documents, and this is very important. If you said you've used documents in your analysis, please show, I think it's very important to show how you've actually used those documents, how they've informed your analysis. Observations, I feel are very key, particularly doing these interpretive studies. So if you've observed participants, what is your role been and how you've been able to do that, and have you been able to maintain a diary, logs, and how has your thinking changed over time? I think videos and photographs, these are lesser used, but I'm seeing them happen in our discipline, which is great because they tell a real story. Like if I just showed you the picture in the previous slide about the seafood processing, straight away you get to know, okay, this is grueling work and this is what it involves. And I think this needs to, Andres had mentioned a few articles. There's another really interesting article in AMJ 2019 by Marc Laurent, and he talks about his going through sense making and his journey through the Amazon River. And there are a lot of barcodes which he put actually YouTube clips of himself. So I think that is one sensible way of moving, where you can actually link people onto some of those clips. And I think that's quite possible to do that. And finally, marketers have been using ethnography, which is basically understanding consumer culture online. But here also, I think in my area of research, for instance, in modern slavery, what one can look at is WhatsApp chat groups and so forth by migrant workers. And that can actually be used as a part of your data as well. And the other point I want to make here, it's very important that the analysis that you do take into account all these different data sources. So it's not only relying on interviews, but all these other things. You don't need to use everything, but whatever is conducive to your research method and your research question that you posed. And theorizing is sensitive to the context. That's very important. Next, please, Eugenia. Okay, so finally, I thought I'll just talk about challenges and also, I would say, also the joys, challenges, and the way forward of doing interpretive field work. I think one of the big challenges is so that you're prepared. This is something so that all my purpose of talking about this is so that the reviewers reviewing this work are conscious of the hard work that has gone behind this work. First of all, clearing the ethics clearance in any of these or all our universities can be a hurdle. About you're taking photographs, you're taking videos, how are you going to be doing that, how are you going to maintain anonymity and all of those factors. So I think that's a big hurdle to cross when you're doing this. The other thing that you really need is commitment by by partner, and by that I mean is a organization that is helping you sponsor your, that you're going to be spending extended period of time within an organization or of a community or a worker group that you might get involved with. A lot of this work takes trust, and it takes a long time to actually build that up. So your first interviews that you might do might be just kind of getting an understanding of the context, and takes patience to build that. It's also very important to disclose your participant observation role. So if you're observing certain processes, or if you're seeing how, for instance, workers are using certain technology, are you being overt about it so the workers actually know they are being observed? Or is it being done in a covert manner? So you're actually going in the factory, working with them without them not being known that they are being watched. That is, there are papers that have been published on that as well, and the covert part of it raises certain ethical issues, but it's about, was senior management actually aware about that? And one can get some very unique, compelling insights by actually having those participant observation roles. The other thing is, and this is, I think, for all of you, right, interested and wanting to publish this kind of work, I feel the methodology section needs to be revisited. So it's not your stock standard kind of a methodology section. It will be far more detailed. You'll explain how you got into the field, how you get access, who did you interview, what photographs you took. They will probably be more appendices, and I think this is for the special issue editors to also look at, they should be extensive so that when the reviewers are reviewing such papers, they have an idea of, okay, oh, great, this is excellent data. What can you keep and what can you take out, and what do you keep in the appendices? And this is, I think, it's like going and seeing a really interesting movie. There's going to be an element of surprise. There's going to be things that you'll doubt. There'll be experimentation. Be prepared for changes in the research questions, even iteration in the coding that you go through. If the coding process will change, trust me, my coding has changed so many times when I was working on this current study. And final word of advice is, don't particularly look at, okay, this study followed this particular template for coding, and let me just blindly follow that. That is a recipe for disaster. Because what worked for them and their data set will not work for you. So try and be true to your data and tell it as it comes. So don't fall into the trap of templates. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vikram. That was really vivid. It was really great to be able to experience and to hear from you about your experiences. I think what stuck with me was how much you talked about emotion, both in terms of the participants, but also in terms of the researcher experience. I think you said, for the participants, it was fear, but also as a researcher, embrace surprise and doubt. And so this really brings to life the fact that we're not so worried about this idea of a neutral, distanced researcher sort of role when you're thinking about really, particularly interpretivist, but qualitative research generally. Thank you so much for that. That's really great. And that, I think, sets the scene for moving us on to Leonardo Marques, who's going to also speak about his fieldwork experiences, which will complement this really, really nicely. So I'd love to introduce Leonardo. Thanks, Leonardo.
Hello, and good morning or lunchtime or evening for everyone here. I saw a few familiar faces as I was scrolling Nice to see you, and thank you, JSCM, and thank you, the editors of the special project here for organizing this. This is amazing. It's an amazing chance to be here also. It was not easy to plan these 8-10 minutes. It's a bit of a retrospective of what I'm doing, and that puts you a bit on the spotlight. But I've enjoyed the exercise, so I hope it can also be useful for everyone else. And it's amazing to be here after Andreas and Vikram, and also Victoria within the story, because it sets the scene for things I'm going to be speaking about, and basically already anticipates some of the comments I will have. So we will speak a bit about sweater, putting a sweater and taking out. We'll speak a bit about thickness, maybe sometimes using other words. We'll speak about the trusted insider that Vikram mentioned, and the protocol and how interviews evolve, for example, and how do you capture the smell of a place and use that as data. So a bit of the hurdles and maybe also the perks of going to this type of research. And also on background, I do have an engineering background, so a bit different from Vikram. I started off assuming or taking for granted that I'll be doing surveys all my life as I decided to move into academia. But also there is a second part of me, which is I had 8 years of experience between my master and my PhD in practice in the fashion business in Brazil, from analyst, coordinator, manager, senior manager. And then I decided to drop everything for academia for the PhD in the UK. So that also explains a bit of how the story evolved. And there is another angle to that, which was feeling I was very close to practice, and I was getting away from practice as I started my PhD. And that was a tension all my life. That's why the quote there that I saw once, and I keep it in the original words that I printed, because I steal that from someone else, and I keep that as a souvenir, that I had this print when I saw this lines there, and it really resonated to me. So I always had this struggle. What do I do? And so I started off planning to be a very traditional researcher, and then it slowly evolved. And I will tell you a bit about how this happened. So next slide, please. This slide comes from a paper from Oliva, more like an editorial piece on intervention-based and invitation in job for intervention-based research that can also have a lot of experimental aspects and quantitative aspects in the intervention in terms of methods, but the logic of intervention calls us to think about research in a different way, right? And I also included real time in my topic, in my title, and I will talk about this in a moment. But yeah, these two modes, Oliva takes from Checkland, 1985 paper, which is a nice paper also to go back to think about action research, and proposes these two modes. And they basically help us to plan what's the role of research, and that logic that there is an intervention going on. No, I say real time because I think that helps me think not only about interventions and action research, where usually the researcher is part of the intervention. So you're intervening with those that are intervening in the company, let's say the implementation of a software or anything else, and then reflecting on what is happening. But also for ethnographists, I think you are looking at what's happening, maybe if you are a bit more distant and leaving what's happening, but something must be happening. So there is this real-time perspective. And if you go back to case studies, although many of the case studies we know and we read, we'll say that it's recent. They are interviewing managers from last year. If you go back to traditional interview protocols, we tend to ask managers, think about your most important supplier, and I'll discuss how you manage your relationship. They will end up talking in retrospective to what they have experienced. They won't be talking about how they are managing their supplier this week. Most of the time, they won't be talking about the call they just got and how they're going to solve this call and what they're going to do tomorrow after the supplier rejects their request, for example. So they also tend to speak about everything they have done on their accumulated experience, and often, as we know, on social desirability bias and things like that. they might be saying what you want to hear. So that's a challenge that interventions try to break away from, and what I call real-time investigations, when you're seeing the scene and talking to people and observing what is happening, makes things a bit different. Well, with that, next slide, please. With that, I'll tell you a bit about my storyline. So this talks about failures and successes. So I've picked just 4 of them. My first one, my PhD project, it started off as a multiple case, evolving to a single case, to a longitudinal case. And in fact, in retrospect, it was an action research project. But at the time, I didn't have the skills, I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the support around me, and I was not brave enough to try to picture that and to frame that as an action research. So everything that happened towards the end of the project was kept for future, and I framed the project as a single case, both in my thesis, and then I ended up publishing in JSCM, which was an amazing result. But I'm writing an X to say that it didn't really show the leap to a different type of approach to the research. So results are there, but they were taken from a more new perspective of what was going on, even if towards the end of my 2 years in the company, I was actually really engaging with them, and I left that part a bit off that project. Then, as soon as I came back from the UK to Brazil, I came up with an action research initiative, and I got funding and I got partners, but I was so deeply involved in helping them and delivering what we had agreed to do that I could not make a publication out of that. It was quite frustrating for me. So I was so much into the intervention and the needs of the companies and the stakeholders, I was not prepared to take all the notes that Vikram just described to you, the careful log of a diary and notes and reflections that I could then use later to do good quality, at least research, which is what I'm talking about, and high tier journals. Therefore comes my third project, the intervention. I learned a lesson. So I had a postdoc student, which was here, I think maybe she's here, and I told her, like, you are gonna protect our log. You are log guardian. So no matter what I do when I get involved with these companies and we go deep into the intervention and we try to actually do something for the company and make it happen, you have to protect the log so we can make a paper out of that. That's our deal. And that was incredibly useful. So a bit different from Vikram, let me just step back. I am the trusted insider, right? So each one has your own story. In my case, I've lived this sector, right, for almost 10 years. In fact, I was thinking when I was going to speak to you guys here, I trust myself more as a fashion manager, yet still maybe as a researcher. As I'm now reaching 10 years of my PhD, I'm going to celebrate September, 10 years of my PhD defense. And I maybe now consider myself as much a researcher as I've been a fashion practitioner. So I think that that has helped me. So in my case, my challenge was to find help from others that could help me make sure that the research was also on track and that would lead to good quality delivery at the research front, right? And that came up as a paper at the POM, which was the same special issue as Vikram, the one that Vikram mentioned, by the way. And then we came up with this real-time investigation. This was different. A scandal happened in Brazil, the wine industry. I read the news. I was in France, and I immediately called a friend, my former PhD student, now a friend working in Brazil as a researcher as well, as an academic. And I said, we have to track that. And we had another experience as well where we were going in the place where the scandal happened with 200 workers, victim of modern slavery. And we were interviewing, there were no managers to interview. We were interviewing the mayor, the police station, the lodging where the workers were. We were interviewing the people, the NGOs, the charity that was getting in the scene to help them and to find them a place to stay. And that led us to a very different type of research project as well. And that ended up being published as an impact paper. So that's a bit of the outline, and I'll mention a bit of those as we move along. And now I consider myself like I've decided to take the hat officially I'm going to do qualitative research and I'm going to do alternative methods as much as I can. As long as I'm leading, as Vikram said, I'm happy to join, or maybe Andreas, I'm happy to join collaborations that may have another perspective and I might have something to contribute as a secondary or third author there. But if I'm leading the project, they're going to be looking like this from now on, right? Next slide, please. Oh yeah, the challenges. So yeah, a few comments on these challenges, and I've made some colors to show off a degradé there. So longer and deeper access to data was already mentioned. For me, this was more natural, so that was not really the challenge. At the same time, as a second layer, the capacity to simultaneously produce impact and the ledger, the audit trail of the research was a bigger challenge for me. And then the last but not least, yes, which the hide button there could let us read, is the how do you publish? How do you find an outlet that will accept that? And you guys are so lucky that you have JSCM, so we can skip this part. It's probably less of a hurdle than it was before. So a few highlights, so we don't, I'm a bit over time already, but a few highlights of these two projects that I have mentioned towards the end. So in the first one, that deep access to sub-suppliers in the fashion industry and going beyond tier 2, tier 3, help us debug contributions and understand and recode and iterative coding, as Vikram mentioned, help us understand things that we would not understand without going there and visiting places that, for example, Uber doesn't accept to get there. The official post system in Brazil does not deliver there. And you have basically to find ways to get to a nearby neighborhood and then be taken by the supplier to the location, given the level of criminality that is there. So how do you picture that, and how do you use this to then produce data analysis and research? So that has helped us find things that we would not find in traditional ways, but also it was challenging for the publication side. And we end up with a thick data supplement as big as the paper. So the way I conceive my projects now is if I have a 30 pages paper, I already have a 30 pages data supplement ready to show that thickness of data that comes behind that type of longitudinal and intervention based project, right? I now understand that's the way to go. And in the second project, a very similar approach. We could find things that we would not find, to explore new uncharted territory that we would not be able to without that type of approach. But we had to find unique ways to publish, such as in that second case, an impact pathway, which is a bit more flexible in terms of what type of data do you have and how do you picture that data. And as long as you're exploring new territory, there is more room to frame the paper in a different way. So in both cases, two different strategies to reach the final outcome and to survive that, or to pass beyond that challenge, right? If we go to the next one, now a couple of reflections, right? So these are just like a bit of examples of the challenge. And this is a specific picture that I love, which was produced by researchers for the Belém COP30 in Brazil that happened a few months ago. They've reorganized the world where, in this perspective of the world map, Belém, where the COP was held, is at the center of the map. Right? And I've decided to start using this picture to discuss what was already mentioned, our values, and how do we embrace our values and make clear that our views of the world influence our research. And if we take that alternative route we are discussing today, you don't have to hide it. You don't have to hide it or to block it, but you can rather embrace it and make it clear. And as long as it's clear, you can take with a pinch of salt what you're reading, as much as I ask you all to take everything I'm saying here with a pinch of salt, because this is my testimony, my experience anyway. And to close, I'm going to give you two examples, inspiring examples, hopefully, that we might aspire to. So Van Gogh and Picasso, right? So the last one, Van Gogh, was always alternative as far as I read about his life. So he went straight into breaking the rules from the get-go, right? Whereas Picasso had a very formal training. and produced very traditional type of art before he went to form a club and break the rules and come up with something that would revolutionize art. So you can start from any of these perspectives. If Vikram started right off as a qualitative, I was really into producing surveys, and I then eventually realized that was not my path. But I was trained to do that before I could explore the territory of doing something alternative. Each one will find their own path. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leonardo. Thank you so much for sharing that learning journey, essentially, that you've gone on, and to legitimize this idea that it is a learning curve. I think if we're moving into this space of adopting novel qualitative approaches that you might not have experienced before, not been trained in, accepting that sense of uncertainty is going to be a part of that journey. So thank you very much for being so open and honest about your experiences with all of that. That's really helpful. I'm conscious of time, so I think we'd like to prioritize any questions from the audience first. I don't know if we have any already, Alina. If not, then no. Okay, well, if you have any questions, I mean, please post. I mean, we can keep a record of them, and I don't know, see what we can do with that afterwards. If there are no questions right now, then I'll ask the panel just for a final brief comment from you all, if that's okay, to help us to close. Leonardo, I'll start with you, just off the back of your presentation. Given your honesty about the challenges in that leap that you've made, in a brief statement to anyone who might be listening here, what would you say to them, someone who's considering making that leap but feeling a bit tentative, has got a traditional background? What would you say to them in a brief comment to them to make that leap?
Yeah, so I've tried to already touch on that a bit, but you have to find your own way, right? In my case, I was very comfortable with the trusted inside approach, my access to data and my background, professional background. So I had to find the other skills that I was missing. Maybe your case is different. You already came from a background in a master level, or your former studies already made you a bit more aware and prepared to that type of approach. If you're in an institution that supports quality over quantity, longitudinal research over short-term results that will help you do this type of research from the get-go, or you might feel you need to prove yourself with a couple of papers in a more traditional way, with more traditional co-authors, before you explore new territory. Don't feel my only comment is don't feel pressured to do necessarily what others have done. Try to find your way to approach this realm, and then find people that can help you, that could collaborate with, and find sources that can inspire you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes, that's really inspiring. To finish us off in our final 2 minutes, I'm going to ask for very brief final statements from Vikram and Andreas, both in the same area about why this is so important. So I'll start with Vikram. Your discussion of the importance of immersion for that understanding of the interpreted realities. Why is that so important for supply chain management scholars and for the future of our field?
Yeah, just very, very quickly, Victoria, my view is right now we really need immersion, and it's just not going for a factory for a day trip and doing semi-structured interviews, but really understanding the mindset of our participants, how they behave, how they act, how culture influences practices. Because if we really have to make changes at the grassroots level, of how people or workers are adopting technology or not, or misusing technology, we really need to understand their mindset and their point of view. And for that, one needs to have deep immersion, just to think about how they think and how they behave. And that will help direct, more importantly, other than our journal publishable outcomes, change policies for multinationals, not do the wrong thing.
Absolutely, that impact more widely. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Vikram. And final word from Andreas then. JSCM is very supportive and is pushing this diversity for qualitative approaches. Can I ask you for your view then, complementing what Vikram has just said, but why, for your perspective and from the journal's perspective, is it so important that we see this diversity in qualitative research?
Yeah, I think the world is complex, and SCM can be seen as a technical engineering phenomenon, but that's not where you get the nuance. And I think Vikram and Leonardo made it clear. So really get the perspective of workers, both far away from us, but also in our own country. Learn how they see the world. I think this is really what it makes interesting, how we really learn and get a deep knowledge. And our world has now become so superficial with tweets, with I don't know even how few words. So we're summarizing everything, and academia has the opportunity to really extend and really dive deep and observe over several years. And this is, I think, where tech billionaires shape our narratives, or marketing agencies shape our narratives. I think we have the opportunity also to fight back in a way, and really understand, but also prescribe actually how the world might look like instead.
Absolutely. That's a great note to end on. Thank you very much, Andreas. So we are just past 10 o'clock. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for joining us today. And of course, to thank our guest speakers, Andreas Wieland, Vikram Bhakoo, and Leonardo Marques. Thank you for your inspiring presentations. I hope you've all found it interesting. Keep an eye out for our future events and submit to our special issue. And we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.